Okay, so I think we're going to get started on the Intuit TV and on the phone. So thanks all for coming. We are happy to host Tyler Jewell here from a company called Codenvy. I was just going to tell a little story about how I got connected with Tyler. A few months back, I purchased a Chromebook Pixel, which is a really high-end Chromebook laptop, Chrome OS laptop. Just has a browser on it, if you don't know what Chrome OS is. And I was, browsing the web, great, reading my email, great. I'm a developer, so I was like, well, how am I going to develop code on this? And so I went to the Chrome Web Store looking for IDEs, and I came across Codenvy, and I installed it. Installed it is a funny word on Chrome OS. You basically just get a link to it, and lo and behold, I was starting to edit code, and I did a few toy applications, and over time, I was like, well, why can't I develop, online payroll? Why can't I develop QuickBooks Online using this IDE? And I saw on their site there was an enterprise version, so I submitted a support ticket to see what that was about and how that would work. And Tyler responded to my support request, and we got connected, and we started talking about a proof of concept of the Cloud IDE and the enterprise. And so we have a proof of concept installation in our AWS virtual private cloud that I've been playing around with. So that's the story of how we got connected. And with that, I'd like to introduce Tyler, and you can give us a talk. So Thank you for coming.
Thanks, Jeff. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tyler Jewell, and I am the CEO and founder of Codenvy. First, a couple of questions. How many people in here have tried using a Cloud IDE before? I got one hand, two and a half. Okay. Okay, good. What is the IDEs that you most commonly use? What's your favorite IDE? Sublime, NetBeans, IntelliJ. Anybody use Eclipse? You're excited by that?
Nobody else would say it.
RubyMine? Anyone? You guys are doing JavaScript? No RubyMine in here? Okay. Great. Well, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to take 15, 20 minutes, provide an overview about where we came from, why we are doing what we're doing, what our ambitions are, and then also give you a little demo of what we've got as well. Codenvy as a company is only about 6 months old, but what you're going to see in the IP started about 4 years ago. And we're actually a spin-off of a French company called Exo Platform. And Exo Platform makes a product that competes with Jive, Yammer, Podio in the collaboration space. And about 4 years ago, they were working on a version of their platform, and they had invented some multi-tenancy IP inside of the JVM. And so they could take a single JVM and slice it up about 500 different ways from a memory and compute standpoint. And the engineers were looking around the room at each other and saying, geez, we need to find a way to test this at scale. We need to build something online, and maybe if we're lucky, we can get like 100 people to come use it. So that we can test this multi-tenancy IP. And so they said, hey, let's build a cloud-based IDE. And what they did is they built a widget factory for their proprietary platform, and they did it inside of a Chrome browser at the time. And they got exactly like 110 users, and they were just so happy. 110 users came, kicked the tires, and the widget factory did its widget thing entirely in the browser. And the multi-tenancy IP worked great at scale. But the users kept coming back, and they were saying, oh, this is kind of interesting. The browser's somewhat fast. It's fast enough. It'd be great if you could do, maybe like PHP or Ruby or Python or, Java would be really good because their platform was in Java. And so the engineers who weren't really supposed to do this, they were supposed to be working on the platform, in their evenings and nights, they would sit there and they would tweak with the product. And, about 6 months later, they'd show up with Java support. Hey, look, now it supports Java. We can compile it, we can edit it, and that would bring in some more users. And then the users would come in and say, this is great, it would be awesome if you could do JavaScript and HTML. And then the engineers would run off and do their thing, and they'd come back, and it would work. And in about the middle of 2011, they'd been doing this, a couple of guys, it was a garage project. They got around to adding Google App Engine support. And this would be allowed to create a Java project and then deploy something to Google App Engine. And all of a sudden, the users got really excited. And instead of it being like a couple thousand users, it started being, tens of thousands of users, just because there was a PaaS environment that were at it. And a lot of things happened from there on out. I'm going to tell the story a little bit about that. But it grew up. And it grew up so much that I was asked to, come in and take a look and figure out what to do with this little side project starting about a year ago now. And we figured some things out about the market. And we got really excited about our discoveries. And the conclusion was, hey, we got to get it away from the French. And that's always a dangerous thing to begin with. So let's get it out of the hands of the French. Let's bring it into the hands of America here. Let's separate it from Exo Platform, and let's operate it independently and raise some money on this. And we did that. And in January, we raised $9 million from a variety of investors and angels. And we established operations in both Europe and San Francisco. And at this point in time, we're about 40 people worldwide. Almost all of that is engineering, with the exception of a weenie like me and Eric, who's in operations with us and does marketing stuff for us, and a couple of others as well. So we're almost 100% R&D based organization here. So that's how we got here, right? But why does this matter, and why did we raise so much money? Founded this year, we're spin off from Exo Platform. We're based in San Francisco. We've got 3 products I'm going to talk to you about. Codenvy, Codenvy Enterprise, and Codenvy ISV. We're a bunch of things. We're not just a cloud IDE, but we're also on premises as well. And now we're close to what started off as 100 users. We're pretty closer to 75,000 users. And we're adding about 2,000 a week. And when we go through our user base, over 25 of the Fortune 100 have multiple people who are using this product. And on our largest day, we actually had 1,500 concurrent developers all coding, building, and testing simultaneously on the system at once. And while 1,500 doesn't sound like a lot, think about how many people have to be working to all issue a build at the same time, or to all be editing all at the same time. I believe here you guys are at 3,000 employees worldwide at Intuit, right? And with 3,000 people in R&D. Right, 8,000 employees. But even to take all 3,000 of those people who are worldwide and to have all of them actively working in their IDE space all at the same time, that's pretty remarkable, because you guys have meetings, and then there's meetings with meetings and all the other stuff that gets in the way of being productive. But let's get to it. So we are a cloud IDE, okay? And we all know that an IDE is an industrial tool, right, to create applications. But here's the interesting thing, is that developers, these were 1,200 engineers done through a LinkedIn survey, and they were polled, and they indicated they spend 13 hours a week just administering their desktop, right? And I thought this was kind of crazy when I first heard it, but I'm more of an Eclipse guy than anything, and I actually kind of believe it. And we figured out that there are kind of 5 costs to administering your desktop. 3 of the costs are for the individual, and 2 of the costs are kind of team-based costs. So the first is there's an installation cost, right? What does it take to download, the time it takes to download, install the software. No big deal. There's a maintenance cost of the update cycle, the patches, right? And the process of just keeping things current there. There is a starvation cost. So after you've put the equipment or the components onto your computer, it's then taking away from resources that other applications on the computer need. And then on the team-based level, there's a merge cost of taking that synchronization and then merging it across other computers for the individual or across all the computers for the team. And that merge cost gets more complicated because being developers means that you are constantly reconfiguring things, right? So the process of just making the software work means you're reconfiguring your desktop, which means that you now have a merge cost to keep things synchronized across the board. And then the fifth cost, I call it like a human cost or a policy cost. It's the cost of trying to get everybody to operate the same way. I sit on the board of a Asia Pacific company, WSO2. Has anybody heard of it? WSO2. They make great software. Please buy it. But they have 180 engineers worldwide. Not nearly the size, but they're all Java shop. 100% Java shop, 100% Eclipse and IntelliJ. And once a day, it's like clockwork. Once a day, someone forgets to check in their code, right? And then they go home, and it's purely accidental. They got sick, they had to go on vacation, whatever it was, and it breaks the build. Sometimes as short as like 5 to 10 minutes before it gets corrective, but it can take days before the build is corrected again, right? And the reason being is that you can't get onto the guy's machine, you can't check the code in, and so everybody's waiting for this guy's code to be checked in. So do you revert everybody back, or do you find a way to move him forward on that? And so there's just these consistency issues of like, how do you get everybody to run the same QA processes on the IDE? How do you get everybody to make sure that they check in their code before they go home? And so these things take away time from actually writing more code. So when you add it all up, and then you realize that when these same developers were asked how many pieces go onto the desktop, the average answer was 12. It's not just an IDE. What goes on the desktop? There's the IDE, there's the build system to compile, package, and test. There's the runtime, which is a stack in itself, right? So you'd probably put, it could be as simple as something like Tomcat, but it can be a more involved entire base middleware stack that you've got to put on there so that you can debug your local changes. And then, on average, about 6 to 9 plugins per developer. Right? A plugin for the build system, a plugin for the runtime, you've got your code management, your agile, plugin that's there, project management, maybe some sort of static analysis tools to go with it. It adds up. And that's even before you start layering in the things like, hey, I want this code intelligence add-on, or I want to format my code in a certain way because these are my personal tastes associated with it. You put all these things on there, and yeah, you install them the first time, and they work as installed, but then they start updating themselves. And they quickly get out of sync. Anybody who's used Eclipse, right? The most popular thing I hear about Eclipse as the maintenance cycle is the uninstall everything and let's just start from scratch and reinstall everything again. So the problem that we solve is not that we're a better IDE. The problem that we solve is that we're focused on taking that 1/3 of administration time on the desktop and taking it down to 0. The value of a cloud IDE is not that it's in the cloud. The value of it is that it's a provisioning system. What we sat down and we realized, we said, the killer thing here is not can we build a better code editor, but can we create an environment where any type of developer on any device can build any type of application anywhere in the world. And then when they create that work, can they have that work shared as part of a community so that sharing becomes easier, and when sharing is easier, the volume of sharing increases, and when the volume of sharing increases, guess what? Productivity increases, right? So if we could centralize everything, not just the IDE, but centralize everything that was on the desktop, then what would happen is that developers code, administrators would configure, and managers can monitor, which I'm sure every developer is going to love to hear that pitch on that. But we have a separation of responsibilities at that point in time. And this is the Codenvy approach. So what Codenvy is we are a centralized environment that houses your workspace. And what we did is we took the logical workspace that was on the desktop, which is more than the IDE, and we decoupled that workspace from the physical underlying dependencies. And we moved that logical workspace into the cloud. That workspace, right, contains 5 things in us, right? We put an IDE in there, but we have a full build system, and we have a full runtime. We call it a cloud local runtime that's there. It's everything that a developer needs to code, build, and test as an individual. There's a project space in there. We'll talk a little bit about what that means. But then there's also a local clone of your code. So now everything that you need to be productive is there. This cloud workspace is accessible by your browser, whether it's a web browser or a mobile browser on that. And then what we do is we provide a lot of automation within the workspace. So when you create a project, if you tell us the type of project that you're going to create, we can then automatically configure the IDE, the build system, and the runtime so that they're properly configured with each other. The other thing that we do is that if you tell us about the production environment, right, the production environment obviously has certain restrictions around it, and we can propagate those restrictions up to the IDE, build, and runtime as well. So the more we know, the more we can configure. We then slipstream into your normal tool chain, right? We don't replace your normal tool chain there. So you still check out code from GitHub or Bitbucket. You still kick off your builds using Jenkins or Hudson, right? Or some other continuous integration server. And if you want to, you can deploy directly to a PaaS, and I'll demo all this. Once your code is all in this central environment, there are 3 forms of collaboration. The first form is that you can use it like WebEx, where you're doing a screen share. And so this is popular with instructors. Sometimes it's a code review where there's a presenter and everybody else is just monitoring it remotely. The second form, we call it collaborative. This is like Google Docs. So you can put multiple developers in the very same workspace. And when you're in the same workspace, you get multiple cursors, multiple editors, and you're all working together. So if one guy issues a build, the other guy is watching the build at the same time. And so you can step on each other's toes. So this is ideal for pair programming, right? And then the last model, we call it a factory, right? You can actually clone entire workspaces here. So much the way that you can clone a GitHub repository, you can also clone the build system and the runtime, and then make that clone available to other people, right? So that they can get a replica of that and begin on a copy of that. The clone capability is powerful really in 2 modes. One mode is the support mode, right? You could be in an environment like this and you've got some sort of issue and you want to post a question to Stack Overflow. You can create a factory. We give you a URL. You put the URL on Stack Overflow, and now all those readers, when they click on that, they get their own replica of the exact environment and exact build output that you had when you were running it. Right? So support is a big one. And then the other big use case for the forking is about evaluation, its marketing benefit. Anytime that you want to get a developer to use an API or an SDK, use technology faster without having to set up an environment, create a factory, push it out. With our 65,000 users, we've had a pretty good adoption. The most common things people use to build with us, they build a lot of APIs. A lot of web apps are being used with this system. We do have people building Android and iOS apps with it as well. We're just about to push formal production Android support out the door. And even with that, we can do things like not just build Android apps, but we can run simulated Android emulators entirely in the browser as well. So you don't even need to have an Android device to build these mobile applications that are there. We're in all these organizations. We have great adoption. When we look at our engagement, we have some users who are using the product 12 hours a day. Right? Turns out that there are 3 categories of users. So one of the most common questions I even got it at lunch today from your leader here, which is, why would I use this over my popular IDE, IntelliJ, NetBeans, this thing that I've spent years learning all the keystrokes on? And the answer is that there are certainly those people where they have selected us as their primary workbench, and there are certainly those people who are kicking the tires with us. But there's a new category of users that have cropped up, and I call them the auxiliary users. And these are people who need a secondary workbench. And these people include commuters, So you're on the train for, to work for 30 minutes, and you need a kind of a quick access environment. But when you get to work, you're going to hop on to your primary work environment. You've got people who buy Chromebooks. At Google I/O, they gave away 6,000 pixels to the attendees for free, and everybody at Google I/O is a developer. And so, Google says, come use this, right, if you want to keep that pixel and code on it. Hackathons. Any sort of situation where you're going to create something in like 2 to 3 hours. You want to bring you and a couple of your buddies together, and you guys want to sit down, and you don't want to deal with getting everybody's environment set up. So with a hackathon, you set it up. You set it up once, you invite everybody, and you just get going with it, right? A lot of the corporate uses, interns, right? Do you really want to have the intern spend a week trying to get everything set up, or do you just want to get them in an environment and say, look, it may not be everything that you want, but it works. Also, anybody who's new to a code base, right? It's great for that new to a code base exposure that's there. We have an SDK. It's in beta. The SDK looks like Eclipse SDK, but it allows you to change the build system and the runtime as well. So you can come in and add your own languages. You can add your own frameworks into it. You can swap it out, much like the same control that you would have over your desktop. And then we have an on-premise version of this as well. And I'm going to show a little architecture graphic of this before I get into the demo. But with the on-premise version, it's the same version. It goes behind the firewall. It allows you to deal with any sort of regulatory issues where the code cannot leave behind the firewall, or there's systems that can only be accessed that way. We've done about a dozen of these installations. We're going to make it commercially available a little bit later this year. But the real value proposition of this is that when we set this up right, we're actually faster than what you get on your desktop. We can make the development experience better for everyone in here doing a centralized install than you can on your own desktop. And the reason being, it's kind of probably an interesting question, right? How can we do that? And the reason being is if you think about development, what you guys do, it is very sporadic but highly intense bursts of activity, right? And unfortunately, it's like one of the most inefficient uses of your computer that you could possibly imagine. When you're using an IDE, that's a lot of file manipulation, right? So that's I/O bound, the IDE itself. When you're compiling, that's CPU bound. And when you're running the application, that's memory bound, right? So, and I don't know of many developers who are doing all three at the same time, all the way through the day, right? You're typically one or the other throughout the day. So by definition, you've got some portion of your resources that are sitting idle on your desktop, even if you've got a $4,000 machine, quad core, and everything's optimized to your liking. What we do is actually in our cloud at scale, we actually run separate clusters for IDEs, builds, and runs, and they're each independently scalable. And then we put queues that sit between each of those. And so you as an individual workspace, you're actually making use of 3 separate clusters, and we can optimize the performance so that A, all the resources are being used 24/7, and B, they're being scaled up to any size of hardware necessary to achieve the job at any level that's there. So the net effect is that there's no blocking impact, right? When you're building, the IDE works, and when you're building, the runner works. And then the second thing is that we can scale it well beyond what you can get on an individual desktop that's there. We have a business model online. We're just starting to sell it. I'll get back to that. And we've been growing great. We've got a lot of great quotes about us. People say good things about us. We hope you give us a try. But what you probably came really for was the demo. So, got a demo environment here. You come to us. Today, if you go to our homepage, pretty standard stuff, right? We ask you to log in. You can use OAuth, so if you have a Google or a GitHub account, you just click a button, and you're going to click twice, and you're going to have a total account with that. This is going to change in about a month, and we're just going to get rid of accounts set up. And everything is going to be through a factory. So the actual onboarding process, instead of me having to log in, is actually going to be someone saying, I'd like to start a Spring application. And you click that, and we're going to provision the entire environment ready to go in 10 seconds. So our whole goal is we want you to do Hello World no matter how complicated it is in under 10 seconds, no matter what. Let's get logged in here. I've been invited to multiple domains. Just going to log into my primary one here. Load this up. It's interesting. Like after this loads, it's partially dependent upon the browser speed that you've got here. At home for me on like an 8 megabit connection, this will take under about 10 seconds to load. It's a little bit longer here. I'm using Chrome. It's the latest version of Chrome. We support Chrome, Mozilla, Firefox, and Safari at this point in time. And there's a couple of mobile browsers that we support that's here. We implemented all this in GWT. If you're familiar with Eclipse, you'll be very familiar with the look and feel of this. We've got a menu bar way up top that's getting cut off just a little bit up there. I don't know if they can adjust that down, or maybe I can maybe shrink that a little bit. Is that better? Yeah. Okay. Here we go. And it's a typical project workspace, right? We got projects on the left. There's a bunch of things you can do, and I'm just going to go and create a new project real quick. When you go to create a new project, this is part of the work where we say, hey, tell us about the environment. The more we know about the environment, the more we can configure to work correctly. These are all the languages that we support out of the box. Also, it includes all the platforms that we support out of the box. And we've got some intelligence in here, right? So we know that if you select Spring, which is what I just selected here, you can't run Spring on all the different platforms that are out there, right? So we can limit some of that stuff down. In this case, I'm going to select no platform as a service, which means cloud local. It's only going to run in our environment here. And we'll just say, this is the Intuit afternoon demo. And we'll just do a simple Spring app. Click Finish. And in here, we'll notice you've got multiple views of it. Trying to make sure you can see what I can see. You've got a file-based view. You've got a package-based view, if you're familiar with Java. So I can actually go in here, and you can see there's a Hello World package. There's a greeting controller. Opens up the file. And a lot of what you would do in a typical IDE is available here, right? So we've got interesting things like color syntax highlighting. Sounds obvious. We've got code folding, so we can collapse. You can set your own folds if you want on that. It's giving me a lot of errors right now, but if you see in the lower right corner, in the background it's resolving all the dependencies. It's a new project. It's taking all the files and it's running the dependencies across all those files. And after it initializes that and resolves all the dependencies, a lot of these error tooltips will go away. But we've got tooltips. You can see the pop-up here. And there's a lot of other capabilities that are in here that you would expect in a browser. You can write. We could create like getters and setters off this variable if I wanted to. I could create a new constructor off of it. We have code refactoring. So I could take that object that's there and come down to Edit, Refactor. So we could refactor and rename it, and it'll work across all the files on the server. Right? That's there. Let's see, what else? You can see the highlights over here. So we've got some error highlights that are popping up. We've got some warning labels now that the dependencies have resolved themselves. We've got auto-completion as well. So if I just come in here and do, username dot, you can see that we've got an auto-completion that comes up. There's JavaDoc. Not the best resolution, so we're getting some things cut off here. But all in the browser. Nothing special that's here. Let me go ahead and delete this. And so, pretty basic. So I'm just going to come in here real quick and say build. And, we've got multiple output windows that show up. This is building it. While this is running, what I can also show is, let's see here, we've got properties, output, build, just like in Eclipse. And here's the outline view. Got an outline view as well. right? And the outline view changes based upon the type of project or the type of file that you've got open, right? So there's obviously different for CSS or an XML file versus an object-oriented file that's here, right? And that build was successful. Great. So let's go ahead and run this. And just for fun, we'll go ahead and run it in debug mode because we have a full debugger in this as well. It's not an IDE without a debugger, I don't think. So what's happening here is that it built it on the second cluster. The IDE is running in the first cluster. And the run is taking place in the third cluster that's there. And we're actually booting up an entire environment that can support Spring applications here. You can see that. Great. The debugger is brought up. Finish building. Here we go. And so it started on there. And if you couldn't see that URL, let's see. Just trying to get this to screen to be so that you can see the whole screen, because it's cutting off like half the top up there for you guys. Here we go. There, can you see that? Yeah. So you can see that the application's running on a different domain, Codenvy Corp. Here we've generated a temporary runtime for this. I'm going to say enter your name. Let's say hello Intuit. Hit OK. It says hello Intuit. That's great. Awesome. But as you saw, we got the debugger that popped up. And let me just go here. We're just going to set a breakpoint there. We'll run it again. And then hello Intuit. And now you see it's spinning because it's got blocked. I come over here, and guess what? Yep, it's a full-on debugger. Right? Everything you'd expect, step into, step over. Just go down here. Here's the hello Intuit. Just change the variable real quick. To hello Tyler. Change that. We will run the rest of the app. And sure enough, come out. Go in there. Okay. So this is all in our cloud local environment. That's fun. Nice little toy. We'll just close this app. Close that. Create another one here. This time we'll do like a web app. We'll do it to Google App Engine. Now it's like, okay, you're going to Google App Engine. We need a little bit different configuration. I don't want to use that. And so now, because you're deploying a Google app, Google App Engine needs to know the name of this app that you're going to deploy. It's the nature of their system that's here. And it should bring up for me. Here we go. Here we go. We're going to create this app. And I just got to create a unique identifier. Intuit Spimo02. That's available. Great. So now that's registered on Google's side. And then once it's registered on Google's side, now the association between the cloud browser and Google has taken place. And we can go ahead and deploy that. And so just the project, here it's a web app. And it's a sample Google App Engine web app. It's compiling it on our servers. And you can actually run it on our servers as well. Or if you want to, instead of running it on our servers, you can do a push, a direct paths deploy. So you get your choice, run local or push deploy on that. Other stuff that's in here, there's a full shell. It's not a bash shell, it's a limited shell, but you can run operations against the paths vendors, the Git repositories that are there. You can manipulate the files in your workspace. But the shell is entirely in your browser. We also have very deep Git support, right? So it's more than just cloning a repository. You can start a new one. You can push your changes. You can issue pulls off that, do merges. It looks like our app was done on Google App Engine. And in a moment, you'll see that that app is now running on Google App Engine, and you can push the other changes to it. Okay? So it's running there as well. So that is the essence of the IDE, right? It's pretty much all the capabilities that you would expect. I think the only thing that I'm going to wrap up with, because it's just fun to do that, is this is our architecture. I know that you guys are engineers and you probably like this. You think about what does it take to build a cloud IDE, and you want to do it as a platform. At the heart of what we're doing is a plug-in architecture, and this is this middle piece. This is really the foundation of it. Everything is a plug-in in our system. The build system, the runtimes, the IDEs, the file manipulations, all a type of plug-in. And then all these integrations we have kind of that we've integrated over time. There are these kind of proxy-based integrations that we handle. We then have a hardware interface, and I talked about the fact that we've got queues that sit between this. So we can do things like in our global community, it's free for use for anybody who wants to do a public project and use a shared queue with the rest of the community. So all your builds, everybody's builds that's online go through a shared queue, and so you have limited access, and same thing here. But if you pay us and you do a premium subscription, then you get private projects, and then we give you a dedicated queue for your workspace, right? So you get a guaranteed set of kind of performance benefits that's there. But we can go beyond that. Like we can give a single account multiple queues, and so you can scale up and scale down the amount of hardware that you need at each of these tiers that's here. We take care of all the high availability, load balancing, right? So all the data is replicated. We manage it across all these clusters that's there. And as you can imagine, there's all the components that get added in as plugins, right? These are the frameworks, the languages, the collaboration mode. It's all part of that. The whole system itself has got its own API on the front end of it. So everything in here is accessible through a web service, a RESTful web service that's there. And that includes the factories. And so the factory capability, that essentially is about creating anonymous tenants, fully working environments, right? And then how the people onboard from that. We then also have a manageability tier, right? So we collect everything that's going on in the system, and so we're a little bit like a Google Analytics, but for a development environment. So I actually know how many developers in the Ukraine issued a refactoring command last week. I don't know why I would ever need to know that, but if I needed to ask that sort of question, like how many builds took place on these types of projects, how many people deployed to Google App Engine, all those metrics are there, and this gets really interesting because now you can start looking at traffic the same way that marketers look at website activity there. And we do all that with Hadoop, and then obviously there's the ability to integrate with your LDAP repository and also export all this data out of the system as well. So this is a real platform, and we can do an enterprise install of this and manage populations as a whole with that. Eventually, we're going to take that Hadoop capability and we're going to expose that to the community at large, so that anybody can kind of query the data that's in there. And also, we think we can start deriving insights and do metrics back into the product itself, so that developers can find out how productive they are relative to their peer group, and so you can compare yourself against others that's there. So that's the platform. I'll leave this up. It's kind of a fun look-see thing there. But I see we've got like 53 people online, about 40 people in the room. So why don't we open it up for Q&A? And I'm very curious to take any and all of your questions. And I think Jeff also has a demo of what he's done internally too. Yeah. Thank you so much for this. Right.
Okay. So if I heard you correctly, you're developing your API. It's not quite published yet.
Yeah,
so things that are plugins to other IDEs, like for instance JUnit, aren't yet available.
That's right. That's right. So the SDK that we call it, where it allows you to do the plugins that's there, it's in private beta now on that. But when we put that out, the way it's going to work is that we're actually going to create a completely separate. You have two options. You have a completely separate cloud, option number one, and it'll be just for people who want to create plugins, test plugins, and see what kind of impact they have. And there'll be like a dedicated Codenvy cloud for that. So you can do that entirely through your browser. The second option will be we will have a single server install of this. And I know it's kind of crazy, but you can install all of this on a single virtual machine, and you'll be able to download that. It's not the fastest thing in the world, but it's a fully functional environment, and then you can write plugins on your desktop as well, which seems counterintuitive, but
I'm not particularly interested in writing plugins, but
you want to consume them. Yeah, So in terms of the plugins, our SDK format looks almost identical to the Eclipse format. So the migration of any plugin that you see in Eclipse, there should be a fairly straightforward migration, but it will be an engineering migration. It will not be like a configurable one that's there. At this point in time, we've got about 24 vendors who've committed to making that port once this is available there.
Is JUnit one of them?
I have not talked to the JUnit guys.
Some other unit testing framework?
JUnit was written by Cedric, right? That's Cedric Bust's framework, right?
I don't remember.
I think so. That's TestNG. Thank you. Okay. I'm pretty sure that they will come along for the ride on this.
What do people gripe most about?
What's that? Gripe?
What do people gripe most about Codenvy?
Well, this week it's the fact that we don't allow you to do a domain, create an account with that starts with a number. Honestly, the things that we get the most gripes about, if you look on our user voice page, we've got like 1,000 votes for features. The number one thing is we don't support console apps today, right? So you can't just do like it has to be a web app. We're working on a solution for that, and we could do a very simple kind of pipe the output, but we're going for a much broader solution. And we think we can enable anything that doesn't have a web interface to be coded in this, including COBOL apps, mainframe, all sorts of legacy stuff. And so we're going to do more generic solution for that and use that solution for console. The other things that people ask for, offline support. Offline support is tricky, and I'm a little confused by that request, frankly, because what we could easily give people ability to clone or replicate your clone offline, but all that gives you is the ability to edit the files. You can't build it, you can't run it. So I think when people think about offline support, to us, I think a lot of people were just thinking, well, it's just a simple text file editor, and it's way more than that. It's the full build and the full runtime. So I think if we do offline support, we want to do this offline. So it'd almost be like you could download a single server version of this, and it won't be as fast, but it still will run, and then sync up when you're back online. And then we get a ton of requests for iOS and Android. Like they want more and more of that sort of stuff. So that stuff is there. Beyond that, we get all the language requests that you would expect. When are you going to support Scala and Clojure and Go and Dart, all the things that are really popular. And we got to the point where we just had so much demand that we had to stop doing it ourselves, and we put all of our efforts into getting this SDK ready so that we can get the community involved on it. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. I don't think we also can take questions online. We've got 53 users online. So feel free to type your questions in there too.
I have two questions. One is just a build up on what you just mentioned, just to confirm. One is to get in a third-party library is plugging the main mechanism to your build environment and your runtime environment.
To do what?
To get in any third-party library or any jar for that matter.
Yes. I can't believe I forgot. No, the answer is no to that question. So we have Maven natively built in to this. Are you guys a Maven shop or a Gradle or an Ant shop? Maven? Then you're going to love this, right? So we run, I don't have it on here, but we run a private Nexus environment inside of here, and every project has a native Maven environment. I don't know if you saw the pom.xml when I created the Spring that's there. So you have a couple of options. One, you can make a reference to any library that's in Maven Central, and then we'll automatically download that and make it available in your workspace that's there. And then the second thing is that if you have any jars or other libraries, you can actually upload them as a file into your workspace, and then there's a way to reference your local POM to that file as well. So anything, pretty much you have a lot of flexibility. We also support Maven multi-module. I don't know if you saw that, so you can do multi-module projects with this as well. We did that because about 2 or 3 months ago, we forced all of our engineers. We told them, look, by May, you're going to build Codenvy using Codenvy. So you better add in all the dang things you need so that, because we're going to rip IntelliJ out of your hands, because that's what they were using. And that was the thing they had. They had a Maven support, they had a Maven multi-module, they put all that stuff in there so that they could continue doing things that they did on it.
My second question was around shortcuts and,
Yeah, all in there. You can change key bindings. I guess I didn't go into those sorts of things, but let's see. But you can easily go, let's see, window preferences. You can change themes. You can change the format layout, how the code is formatted as well, and then you can also customize all the hotkeys, right? So everything in here has hotkeys associated with it too. Yeah.
I was going to answer one of the questions online. Definitely there will be a replay of this meeting for anyone that wants to watch it later. So I just wanted to answer that question from online.
Cool. There's another question online, like how do we compare with Cloud9 and other competitors? As of this morning, there are now 45 Cloud IDEs on the marketplace. And I love it, right, because 2 years ago there was less than 5. Right? So that is a signal to me that certainly something is happening in this space. Now, of those 45, only like 6 or 7 of them have actually raised money. And the total amount of money raised is about $35–40 million. Right? So it's a pretty significant amount of money that's getting backed by this transition that's there. We've raised the most, so I get some minor bragging rights on that. Now, how do we compare to Cloud9, which is one that raised about 2 years ago? They're a little bit head start. A lot of big differences to it, right? First, we're the only vendor that has a platform that can be installed on-premise, that we've designed this as a complete platform that's there. The second thing is that we really focused in on enterprises, corporations, and what their needs are. And if you look at what happens inside of large organizations, they always come back, and the first question they say is, can it support my complicated build processes? And can it support my tool chain? And I've got all these sort of ecosystem things that we've adopted, and so unless you can work with that, it's just a non-starter. So for us, it was about compiled languages, it was about ecosystem support, and a robust SDK, which is definitely areas that we're strong in. In the case of almost all the other competitors that are out there, most of them are just UIs on top of a VM. Right, so like Cloud9, what happens when you get an account with them? They just give you a little VM, and they're just giving you a UI on top of that. And so your VM is kind of basically all the space that you get, and you have to work within that constrained space. And we look at this as, look, it's a population. It's managing a population as a whole, and it's about all that population activity on elastic content. So that's kind of how we really differentiate that at the end of the day. Any other questions? Yes, sir. They want you to use the microphone.
I didn't understand when you started. You said that you're going to remove the username password thing next month.
Yes.
What happens? I mean.
Yeah.
How?
So today you saw the onboarding process that we gave you that I demoed here, right? The way this is going to change is the whole value proposition here is no setup, right? So why make someone say create project? Why make you create an account? It only took me, granted, 30 seconds to do it, but it's still wasted time. And so we believe that everything needs to be instant. And so starting in about a month, we're going to ship this capability. It's in our beta servers now. And what will happen is when you start a project, you'll start by saying, this is the type of project I want, and you won't have an account. When you do that, we will then provision the workspace, and instead of it being in a named workspace, it'll be in an anonymous, temporary workspace that's there. It'll be fully functional. You can code, build, and test. You can collaborate. You can invite others in. You can do the code sharing with that. I didn't demo it here because I didn't want to go through the whole multi-browser setup. Fully functional. If you want to close that browser, you lose all the work, right? Every time you want to deploy something, you have to type in your credentials. Like you have to type in your Google App Engine or your GitHub credentials. That gets to be really annoying. So you create an account when you want to persist. If you want your work saved, you create an account at that point in time. And then we'll take that work that was in the temporary workspace and copy it in. But no matter whether you have an account or not, all new projects will start by factory. Clone, 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 clone. Do your work, and then if you want to copy it into your persistent workspace, then you can do it from there. And we think that is really, when developers see that sort of workflow, they're always going to want to start projects that way, right? You don't wait for any boot time. You don't have to say what type of project you want to configure. You just click and go with it.
I would have preferred that. Sorry.
Yeah.
If browser crashes, I mean, I'll lose it, right?
Browser crashes?
Yeah.
Yeah, but if you can just go back to the factory and click it again and clone it again. I mean, how much work are you going to do before you hit save at the end of the day, right?
Okay.
Right.
Usually in cloud, we expect autosave, things like that. So
Well, when you're editing, we autosave. But I don't know if you noticed that, but like when I was typing files, it was up the top, it was saying say autosave on it. But when I say you lose your work, it doesn't mean that it's not saved on our files. It means that it's not persisted into your named workspace that's there. So if you close that browser, we're gonna wipe it out on that end. Cool. All right. Well, I'm here for a few more minutes. I appreciate you guys coming. Did you want to?
Yeah, I don't know
Show-
if we
talk
wanted
about-
to just quickly kind of show what I've been working on a little bit.
Just hit escape. Yeah, I think it's this tab there. I think it's this tab. I have two.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah.
So kind of where I started with this, really the first place I started with this is is with the toy projects, just Hello World, that kind of stuff. But I was really trying to think, could I do QuickBooks Online development in this IDE, and what will it take to get all the way there? And so let me describe a little bit about this first. So look at the URL here. It's not at codenvy.com. This is actually installed in a AWS virtual private cloud lab environment that we have on Amazon, and it's an extension of our network here at Intuit. So I have access to the Git repo for QBO. I have access to shared services, development only shared services like the QA IAM environment and stuff like that. So I could since I can access some of those shared services, it can make it a lot more useful. I also can protect it from the internet, where if we're subject to security and we're subject to compliance, and so we don't necessarily haven't open sourced all of our projects yet. So this gives us a private on-premise installation of Codenvy, so it can be so we can use it just like it's in the cloud, but it's not in the public cloud. It's in our private public cloud, if you will. So then some of the getting the code in here was relatively straightforward. I've got all of our Dojo stuff in here for QBO, and you can load up the files, edit them, whatnot. So what I'm working on for the next phase of this is really trying to figure out how to get QuickBooks Online, the entire Java application to run in here, and that's a very challenging because it's a very big project with a lot of old build artifacts or build tools that we won't necessarily want to port into this environment. So there's some fixing up that build to make it a little bit simpler, even though a lot of parts of it are Mavenized. But then also for something really lightweight like this, I can just put the the static content here in Codenvy and pretend it's my CDN, right? And so while I can have QuickBooks itself, the services running on a QA environment, and I can develop and change just the JavaScript files on the fly. I don't have to compile anything. I don't have to change anything. I can just save or auto save the file. I just go refresh my browser that's pointing to this, and I see my changes. And so, and kind of where I see this heading as kind of another phase is I'm on the QuickBooks Online ecosystem project, and we're tasked with building a next generation plugin architecture for QuickBooks Online. And so I imagine this for third-party developers, internal developers even. I can say like, hey, go add a menu item to QuickBooks Online, and I can just send you a link to the IDE. You're right here in the Hello World plugin, plugin environment, and you can start, adding a menu item like right away without installing any tool chains or anything like that. So that's kind of where all this is headed. So there'll be further updates, this summer. It's been mostly a white space project for me, but it's also, been a really good learning experience. And I'm working with the engineers at Codenvy have been very responsive and providing them feedback. So I will hopefully be running a pilot at some point. So I'll be sending out some invites for that, and we can hopefully pilot that with a few people and provide them more feedback, as we get this thing going.
Cool.
So,
There was another question. There was one more question. It was about, can you use it on your internal servers here? The answer is yes. So, they were asking, do we need the plugin for that? And chances are you really don't need the plugin for that, because the deployment, one, you're probably doing your builds through post-commit hooks with a continuous integration server, right? That's going to work cleanly. And two, it's pretty easy to add an additional PaaS deployment target to the system without writing a plugin too. And then how does Codenvy manage the integration, migration between private workspace and shared workspace? Could you elaborate on that question a little bit? Because I don't quite understand. So we'll see if they type that in there.
I think maybe what they're talking about is if you're privately working on your own workspace,
Yeah.
and you want to collaborate with somebody else,
Yeah.
does it make a copy of your private workspace into a collaboration workspace, and then you work together in the collaboration, then come back?
You choose.
Okay.
So the answer is you choose, right? So invite mode is where you bring other people into your workspace. That's there. And so essentially what you're doing is that if you're inviting someone into a public workspace, you're giving them right credentials on a public workspace. If it's a private workspace, you're giving them access to and right credentials on that private workspace. That's there. If you could also take that private workspace and then put a factory on it, but then you still have to specify which users can use that factory. So if it's private, it's basically an access control list controlled factory. And only those people who are on the access control list can make a replica and a clone of that. And then the factory process is always the same. It goes into an anonymous, temporary workspace that you can then work in and then copy into your own spot.
It's a question for Jeff. Can you talk about how you got your rig running with Perforce as the source repo?
Yeah, so
Or did you?
I didn't, but we have a guy in FMS, or I guess it's not called FMS anymore, but Kaiser, who is very passionate about Git. And so he's actually installed a replica Git repo from our Perforce repo, and I think EMS, we do something similar. There's also a product called Git Fusion. So that's essentially what I'm using for this. There is some talk about moving QBO into Git completely and getting rid of Perforce. So if you have votes, user voice for that, votes or whatever, I'm all ears. So
You guys use user voice here?
we use it. I think we use it for the QuickBooks Online
That's what we use.
product. So.
The question for Tyler.
Yeah.
On this hosted, on-premise hosted version of Codenvy that's in our AWS,
Yeah.
how does it stay in sync with new features you guys develop?
Today our engineers install the patches for you guys. But I think in order for us to make it commercial, we want to have a phone home, because we don't want to have different installs with different versions on it. But today we're just managing it for you guys.
I work with the engineer late at night to bring the code patches into AWS. So.
We do 2-week sprints, so every 2 weeks we have a new version that goes out the door on it. I didn't demo it here, but the version that's in in our model is when we finish a sprint, it goes into pre-production, and it sits in pre-production while the next sprint is working. So and then after and that allows marketing and support and documentation to do their work while it's in pre-production. And the version that's in pre-prod now has data source capability. So I didn't demo it here, but you can connect to a data source. You can do a local database with it. We'll handle all the XML file configuration of that, and as you deploy the app to another environment, it'll change the data source on that too. So that's in our next release. But we do every 2 weeks we do another push of capabilities out the door.
And just kind of a follow-up to the discussion we had at lunch. So say we're using Codenvy, to figure out how to get third-party IPP developers to build against QBO, where, we want to say, okay, here's our Hello World app, to build as a third party. Do we need to, and maybe this is a question for Jeff, do we need to do an on-premise hosted thing, or could we put all our, could this be fully in their cloud?
So I think it's a question for you in terms of security of the user data. So if we can certainly manage it and host it entirely in our cloud, but then the user data is in our database and they're being managed that way, but it's still your factories on that, and your factories are mapped to your application or SDK types. If you needed that user traffic to be segregated, then you're looking at a custom installation of that. Whether that custom installation is on your servers or on our servers, it's still a segregated implementation at that point.
And really that's...
Is that more of a security?
Yeah, it doesn't really matter because it's all in AWS, right? So it's either in a virtual private cloud or a public cloud. So.
Well, the other alternative, besides the user data being segregated, is we've got a very long pipe of, I'm surprised at how many ISVs want this capability, and about 20% of them go so far as to say they want it rebranded as well. So in addition to that, they want to change the menus, they want to change the nature of the workflow, they want to change the look and feel of it as well. And so that by definition is segregated, but segregated plus customizations on it as well. So I think that because our engineers, they think like engineers, they put an API in front of this. I think 10 years down the road, we look at a world where everybody can have their own personalized IDE. IDE on demand, instant, completely customized to whatever look and feel you want, right? So you want Sublime, you want IntelliJ, whatever it is, instant, on demand, go with it. And I think that's pretty cool. Pretty cool vision.
I have one more question. We actually technically have till 3 o'clock, but
okay.
we can wrap up in a few minutes. But I guess one question for you would be, how do you know that you're making an awesome product for developers? What's your process like for understanding them and?
So developers are incredibly selective purchasers, I would say. Probably one of the most sophisticated selective audiences that are on the planet. I think the first thing that we had to do is we had to tell our engineers, build a product that you wanted to use yourself, right? So if it couldn't even, our engineers have been doing Java on average for about 9 years, right? That's their average lifespan, so they're pretty senior guys, right? So they had to pass that muster that was there. That was the first thing. The second thing is that we have to be absolutely obsessive about customer service. So as cool as this IDE is, every week I'm trying to reach out, everybody in the company, I really asked them to reach out to engineers, users of the product, even if it's just 2 or 3 people, preferably more, but just ask them questions like, what's your project, where are you building, what other tools have you used, what do you like, what do you not like, and that gives us a lot of feedback. And then the other thing, and I didn't really talk about it, which is an important part of our strategy, is I am very, very partner friendly. I have this belief that it's very difficult to build your own developer community. It takes years to build a developer community, right? And only very selective companies build technology that's so amazing that they get their own community that's out there. But if I look at some of my competitors that are out there, they are not partner friendly. Like they're building this IDE and they tell the vendors, hey, you've got to come do the work yourself on that. And we just didn't take that attitude. And so what we did is we really looked at all these different technologies that were out there, and we said, if they're platforms, we need to do the deep integration ourselves up front, because each of these vendors have their own communities. And if we do a really good job at partnering, those vendors will invite us to talk to that community and try to figure out what it is they need on it. So we've bootstrapped all this sort of stuff ourselves, and that's really taught us what do we need in an SDK, what do we need in a factory concept, what are these users that are looking to. And so at this point in time, we've got access. We have the potential to message up to 5 million people on this. And so I think this is a big part of it too, is in thinking about where are these other developers living and pursuing those and spending time there. And that's a big part of what we're doing. When we finish the factory concept, we've got about half of our marketing budget allocated to just going around the world and helping vendors create factories for their stuff. And so hopefully that will give us even more input and feedback, and that will bring other communities into the fold as well on it.
Thanks.
Cool.
All right, I have one more.
Okay,
follow-up
yeah.
So earlier on, you mentioned you have 40 engineers in 2 countries.
At 40 people.
40 people.
Yeah, the engineers.
Do you have any engineers working outside the U.S. using this product outside the U.S.?
All of our engineers work outside the U.S. use this product outside the U.S.
Well, no, but are they using like a hosted version here in the U.S. remotely,
We
or-
run this on the North America zone for Amazon Web Services in production. And in pre-production, it's in our local data center, and staging is in the European availability zone on Amazon. So we have different environments that are in different zones.
Okay, so like for developers in Europe, you would have an instance hosted in Europe and like in Asia.
No, we haven't done that. So for our production, we haven't gotten that far.
Everyone runs out of the US.
For our production environment, all production users today go to the North American availability zone. But we have the ability. We've obviously launched this in a number of different environments, and we know that particularly when we get to some corporations that have regulatory concerns, they're going to come to us and say, "You've got to run one in two zones in Europe. You've got to do one in North America, one for public sector." And so we're prepared to be ready to do that, but we haven't done it yet. And the tricky part with that is when we do that, then when you do create an account, we can't just let you factory in. Then when you create it, we have to force you into account creation, because then you need to pick which data centers you want to be served off of at that point in time.
But like right now, you're not seeing any performance issues for a developer in
No.
Europe using your IDE.
No, in fact, if you guys, someone in here run a scanner on this, load up Codenvy and run a scanner, just do your normal activity, you'll be surprised at how little activity is running between the server and the client. And if you think about it, there's not a lot of things that require the server, right? So the server is required for builds, it's required for runs, but once you've sent the command over, the browser itself, is just sitting there, right? Refactoring commands, that's a server-side effort. But beyond that, almost everything else, like integrating with the PaaSes, right? Get those are all those cloud integrations go through the server, but that's more I/O bound, not so much CPU bound on that. And everything else is just in the browser. And once the browser loads, it's fairly performant.
It's very zippy. That was one of my biggest concerns going in. I'm like, there's no way a web browser can be a decent code editor, and it's actually a good code editor.
Has anybody in here had to code over a terminal services or a VDI? Yeah. So there are still two. Hopefully not anymore. But there are still 2 million people around the world who have to use terminal services as their primary desktop. Right. All those Indian offshore guys, terminal services all the way, and it's a miserable experience, right? And so we've done some tests, and really, we can give just those people, we can give them 4 times the performance with half the hardware, doing it this way versus doing it with the terminal services farm.
Well, if there's no more questions.
Thank you guys so much.
Tyler, for
Yeah.
coming.